Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I am Anusha Srivastava, the director of the covering PM division of the Geostrata, and I am pleased to host you all at the Youth Roundtable discussion on sustainability, technology, and geostrategy in India-G7 relations. The agenda of this conference embodies the intersectionality of pressing global issues and the multifaceted role of the youth as catalysts for sustainable development. This panel aims to scrutinize the evolving dynamics between India, a burgeoning economic powerhouse, and the G7 nations, representing established global powers, highlighting the complexities and opportunities inherent in their relations. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all the panelists present among us, from Geostrata as well as the Mondo International, two leading think tanks in the field of international relations and geopolitics. We have Mr. Michele Pavan from Mondo Internazionale, founder and president of the organization. We have Ms. Caitlin, general manager and vice president of Mondo. We have Ms. Elettra Tirino, the senior researcher for the environment thematic area from Mondo itself. And we also have Mr. Gabriele, the senior researcher from Mondo Internazionale. From the Geostrata, we have Ms. Gargi Tamboli, the head of junior engagement team at Geostrata. Mr. Vaibhav Singh, the technical head at Geostrata. We have Ms. Soumya Man. She is a research analyst at the organization. And we have Mr. Sanjay Gururajan, the head of Peace and Conflict Center at the Geostrata. Welcoming you all to this panel discussion today. And thank you for joining us for this intellectual journey. Let me quickly guide you all through the structure of the discussion. We shall start with the question from the moderator, that is me, to each panelist, who will alternate between two teams, starting from Mr. Pavan, followed by Ms. Gargi, and so on. This session shall be followed by a question and answer round directly among the panelists, where the participants shall be posting the questions in the chat box beforehand, and also mentioning the person that it is directed at. So coming to the first panelist today, Mr. Michele, we know that in recent times, the Indo Pacific region has gained prominence in terms of geopolitics and trade. This has also been recognized by the G7 summit under the Italian presidency specifically. My question to you is about this exactly. How can India and Italy as a presidency enhance the collaboration in the Indo-Pacific region to ensure a free, open, and inclusive maritime domain? And what role can the G7 play in supporting this strategy?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you, with the Mondo Internazionale and Geostrata. So I reply with some points that I assigned that I think that's more important about the relation between Italy and India, because at the moment I think that Italy and India are the most level between the relation between the two countries as soon as after the Second World War. So I think that's most important things to describe and to discuss about that. About the first topic, I think that's about the strategic partnership and dialogue, because I think that we have to implement the bilateral and multilateral engagements between Italy and India, not only between the two countries, but the other strategy and the other continents between Asia and European Union in general. I think that last election about the European Union is focused about the relation between Asia and India, of course, and Italy and the other countries. The second one is G7 presidents, because I think that's the president of G7. Italy can advocate for a unified approach among G7 nations to support the rules-based international order in the Indo Pacific network, addressing issues like freedom of navigation, overflight rights, and unified commerce, and the other things like that. The other topics is about maritime security cooperation, because I think that we have to implement the joint naval exercises and information sharing. So I think that information sharing is very challenging, because I think that we have to share information about maritime intelligence, of course, but related to piracy, trafficking, maritime security threats, surveillance capabilities, and the other points like that. So I think that's very difficult to collaborate, but I think that's the most important thing is to collaborate between India, Italy, and the other countries, like European Union and United States, of course. And the last one, I think that's about infrastructures and connectivity, because I think that's India is the middle of the Asia-Africa growth corridor. at the same time between Asia and European Union country and the relation between the corridor, not only maritime, but of course to the rest of the other things. So we have to share the information about the blue economy, of course, but to develop and to implement the technology infrastructure between the two countries. The last point, I think that's about the leadership, because I think that's it's most important things is to implement the relation like G20 before between the two countries to promote the diversity and at the same time the different division about the Asia and America in general to support and to control in the Pacific, to implement commerce, economic aspects, but of course the security and sustainable development, and of course regional stability with the other countries around India and China. So I think I describe with many points the relation between Italy and India, and the point that we have to work together to implement the response and the practical activities together.
Of course, thank you so much. Moving on to Ms. Gargi Tamboli, we know that the G7 also works towards the agenda of education, and a working group meeting has already been scheduled by the end of June for this very agenda. So India and Italy have a wide-ranging cultural exchange program already. My question then is, how can educational exchanges between India and the G7 presidency contribute to a deeper understanding and implementation of sustainable practices among citizens, businesses, and policymakers?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So basically, under Italy's G7 presidency, with its firm emphasis on sustainability and leveraging its strategic partnership with India, the collaboration between India and Italy through cultural and educational exchanges stands as a beacon of hope for advanced sustainability. For example, educational collaborations like Italian universities and research institutes are well known for their expertise in sustainable architecture, renewable energy, and circular economy. They can engage with their Indian counterparts who are at the forefront of innovations in a green technology and research management. Joint research programs, student exchange, and international conferences focused on sustainability can foster different ideas and solutions. Moreover, cultural exchanges through arts, films, and festivals, we can weave sustainability into our societal narratives, as well as illustrating on how both India and Italy can embrace and celebrate eco-friendly lifestyle. Moving forward with the joint ventures and partnership, Indians and Italian enterprises can divide innovation, sustainable sectors through workshops, site visit, and mentorship opportunities, can highlight successful strategies inspiring a new wave of green entrepreneurship. And finally, regular dialogues between Italian and Indian policymakers can pave the way for the exchange of best practices in sustainability governance. Through joint think tanks and policy forums like us, we can share insights on crafting effective sustainability policies, ensuring that our approaches are not only innovative but also inclusive and adaptive to diverse socio-economic contexts. Together, through these multi-faced cultural and educational exchanges, Italy and India can build a strong, more sustainable future, setting a benchmark for international cooperation and innovation. Thank you.
Right, totally agreed. And collaborations, such as especially this one happening right now, is a big, a step in this particular area. And you mentioned about eco-friendly lifestyles, and my next question to Ms. Caitlin is about this exactly. We know that sustainability endeavors are a global priority today, and the sustainable policies remain a common agenda for both India and the G7. How can India and Italy then collaborate to create more effective policy structures that promote sustainability while respecting each other's unique ESG, that is environmental, social, and governance contexts?
Yeah, so if we define sustainability as basically avoidance of depletion of a given natural resource, we could be referring to like any number of things. So for example, energy resources or biodiversity, food supplies. So I think one thing, and I speak also for the G7 at large and not just Italy, is that something that I think countries of the G7 could consider in its relationships with India is India's population growth. And so one of the things in the back of India's mind, as a state or as a population, is one of its main concerns is its population growth. And this has also been historically speaking. Like if we take, for example, the Green Revolution of the 1960s in India, where the focus was on becoming more of a mass producer of agricultural products, this functioned, this worked, but at the same time at the cost of biodiversity. So I think when G7 countries deal with India, especially in terms of, and in this case, food sustainability, something that they can consider in the back of their mind is not just aiding or not just focusing on mass production of agricultural resources, for example, but also on prioritizing, for example, smallholders and the importance of the smallholder producer, especially in India and also in a country like Italy that has such a massive array of biodiversity, and just as an example of this, in 2023, for example, it was the year of the millets for the FAO because of the role that millets used to play in Indian agriculture, and the fact that the FAO wants to prioritize this return to biodiversity. On the subject of this, so for example, I think the G7 countries could work with India in this context. And one of the big reasons why smallholders now play a smaller role in agricultural production, let's say, is also the fact that quite simply, simple things such as bank accounts or crop insurance, especially in the context of climate change, are not available to a lot of smallholder producers, especially in India and in countries like India. So ensuring resilience through the Indian state or given, through policies would be to ensure that smallholders have access to resilient, insurance policies or to simple things like bank accounts would be beneficial to biodiversity and to sustainable development. Also, I think G7 countries need to recognize at a per person level their own contribution to things like climate change and to certain dynamics that have not necessarily contributed to sustainability in the past and also in the present. So also in terms of things like energy resources. So it would be beneficial, obviously, to work on the development and collaboration on renewables. For example, wind power or solar power, that India has an incredible potential for wind and solar power. And so basically collaborating together to help face the upfront costs with India and also in the G7 countries would be ultimately beneficial to both of the populations.
Yeah, I think I agree with you in this respect that technological innovation, especially in the field of agriculture and with the contribution of the G7, can prove to be a boon to Indian agriculture, which was hit hard by the 1991 reforms. Which brings me to my next question, which is to Mr. Webb of saying, technology and innovation is a prerequisite for development as we know today. The G7 maintains its aims to make tech more inclusive. India is already a booming tech services industry and a huge labor force, we know that. As a technical head at the Geostrata, what do you think are the key areas where tech companies from Italy as well as India can collaborate? And how can governments in the G7 and as well as in the Asian economies create a supportive ecosystem for collaborations in such tech companies?
I think Anusha, you have put it very rightly. As you said, like technology and innovation is a prerequisite for development in this day and age. So like some of the few points or some of the few areas where both the blocks or both the countries, not just limited to Italy, but the broader G7 collaboration where both the countries can work. I think one of them, we have seen that a lot of digital infrastructure development needs to take place, right? For example, we had the Indian government and the French government partnering on transaction systems. We have had the UPI systems going into France. I think even countries like Germany, Italy, or UK can embrace that, right? Because what Indian startups or Indian companies are really good at doing is providing solutions which can be adopted to a larger market. We have seen them doing very well in the Indian markets as far as the UPI concerned, or a lot of other things are concerned, but I think they can be expanded to a lot of European markets as well, right? Second of all, I think AI and machine learning are again a very big thing which can be used. We have had a lot of research and development going into the same both in India and the US, right? We have seen that a lot of G7 countries, even Italy, for example, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, they are great manufacturing houses. We can have these AI and ML technologies go and increase that productivity for them, right? We can have a lot of Indian startups or US startups helping increase the productivity out of these industries. That is something that we can work on for sure. And the third point, as I say, is a lot of sustainable tech, as Gagi correctly mentioned, or even Caitlin correctly mentioned. I think the very prerequisite for us to work on sustainable technologies is consciousness first, right? Very rightly pointed out by Caitlin that first of all, we have to accept that it is a shared responsibility. It is not just India with a very large population, or not just China or Asia, which has been contributing to a lot of detrimental effects that we have had, but even the G7 has a shared responsibility when it comes to such things. I have had the opportunity to talk to a lot of professors in India because I also studied this as a course where I have seen that green hydrogen is something that is booming all over the country, right? We have had a lot of colleges in India, a lot of tech universities in India work on that. Maybe that is a region we can collaborate on. Italy also can help us in like reducing the overall carbon footprints in the longer run. As far as the second part of the question goes, which is that what role does a government play, not just like the Italian government or the Indian government, but what does the broader uh, G7 bloc or India can play, right? Even I was having this conversation with the Consul General of Italy to India, Mr. Tagliafieri, 2 weeks before, and we were talking about the same thing. I think a lot of academic collaboration, a lot of R&D collaboration can happen, and it is happening. It is only that if we can increase it more and more, right? I think policy and investment is a very big thing. We have had the Indian government open up initiatives like the Gift City initiative, where we have had a lot of foreign direct and indirect inflow into India, right? I think that is a market where the G7 can totally tap into, even Italy can tap into that. Because you have to understand that at the end of the day, we are a very large population, and that gives everybody an opportunity to come into the Indian market and come with good products, good services. Indians will surely buy it. That can help the global economy in a broader, much broader sense, right? As far as how to initiate this or how to complement this, I think there is a lot of work which needs to be done on how the government incentivize such things, right? A lot of tax and incentives, maybe for the tech companies coming into India, or even for Indian tech companies going to work in Italy or any other G7 countries. That is something which can help it. As far as a very important factor of this is concerned, which the EU is also very stringent on, is regulatory frameworks, right? We have to be very careful that even with such AI and ML developments, we have to be very careful about regulations for privacy and security, because that is a very main focus for the European Union per se. We have had a lot of countries in the European Union argue for that. And even for India, as a developing economy, the citizens here are also increasingly interested about their own data privacy, their own security. So that is something which we can work on. We know Italians do have expertise when it comes to cybersecurity. Maybe we can bring that into help here. And the last and the most important thing, as I said, again, is like digital literacy and a lot of workforce development, which can happen. As Anusha, you mentioned in your question that we do have a very a very large workforce which can be used. So investing in digital literacy and programs to upskill this labor force can surely help. We can have a lot of academic programs in collaboration with a lot of G7 countries. We have had a lot of programs with Italy per se in the last 2 years, where the countries have signed great deals with Italian universities coming into India, holding a lot of forums, attracting Indian students, even fast tracking the visa process for Indian students. So yeah, that is something we can work in. As far as the other domain of it is concerned, there also needs to be a public partnership, because we can't just rely on the governments to work, right? We can have a lot of summits which can be incentivized in some way. A lot of companies from India going into Italy or Germany or Japan per se, to get a lot of investment back into India, and it can go the other way around. So yeah, I think that'll be my answer for this question. Thank you for asking me this.
Right. Of course, in fact, India's UPI has been accepted into 7 countries. A few of them are also G7 members. And India also has the largest middle class consumer market today. So you talked about AI ML technologies, and my next question is exactly related to this, and it's for Mr. Gabriele. The Indian Italian presidency has spoken about the importance of maintaining the human centricity of the artificial intelligence models. India reiterates this call with the increasing threats of cyber attacks globally, which we have also talked about. What joint initiatives, is my question, can India and Italy, as the presidency of G7, can undertake to enhance cybersecurity measures and protect critical infrastructure and data?
Thank you, moderator. It's an honor for me to be an panelist today. And thank you also for the question. We are talking about the threats posed by cybersecurity and cyber attacks. I think we have to acknowledge that in today's interconnected world, the increasing threat posed by cyber attack poses significant risks to our critical infrastructures and data. So, as nations committed to technological advancement, Italy and India could undertake various joint initiatives to bolster cybersecurity measures, like conducting cybersecurity exercises, like enhance the information sharing mechanism, like developing secure communication channels for real-time information exchange. But having to give a clear answer, I say that the only way to effectively tackle the issue would be to establish a bilateral cybersecurity task force. So similar initiative, I'm thinking about the US-Israel cybersecurity cooperation, have shown how bilateral efforts can effectively mitigate the issue and the cyber risks. So it is an already proven mechanism to effectively tackle the issue posed by cyber attacks. This task force could coordinate efforts, share information on intelligence, on vulnerabilities particularly, and also develop unified strategies to protect critical infrastructure. That's the key point of the task force, so the shared structures and strategies. I mean, we have to face the truth. Cybersecurity nowadays, it is no joke. So if we have to tackle the issue, we have to do it seriously. Maybe a bilateral task force would not be the definitely answer to the problem. Probably it won't solve it. But as for now, I don't see any solution that could be more effective. We have to cooperate and we have to do it wisely and in an important way. Thank you, moderator.
Coordination of effects and sharing intelligence information has been highlighted by Gabriele as well and Mr. Michele as well. So I think what this panel agrees on today is that among the G7 nations and among India, information sharing is a major area where there is a need for collaboration. And this should be taken ahead by both private and government agencies. Rightly said. Moving on to the economic part of things, because G7 itself is more leaning towards economics organization. And it is important for India as well, since India was a part of the G20 and it held the presidency last year. Entrepreneurship and innovation form the basis of Indian economy. And Soumya, this is my question to you. It is also an important pillar of the G7. How can Indian government and the Italian presidency cooperate to accelerate the digital transformation of small and medium-sized enterprises, that is SMEs, What specific technology or support mechanisms do you think can be introduced to enhance the SME competitiveness and global reach in both countries as well as in G7 economies and Asian economies?
Thank you, Anusha, for the question. Like you said, in this era of entrepreneurship, as a researcher at Geostrata, I'm very passionate in studying the growth of small and medium-sized enterprises. What we saw common so far in this panel is that every single panelist has talked about the importance and the increasing relevance of digitalization. So today, under the Italian presidency of the G7, I'm here to discuss how this digital transformation can propel the businesses that are the SMEs into the future. We know that digitalization is essential for making them thrive globally. Having a robust digital infrastructure such as high-speed internet and cloud computing helps them access new market. And another important factor, as it was highlighted by WebHub, that digital literacy, which includes training in data analytics and e-commerce, will empower the SMEs with the skills that they need to stay competitive and transform their business models into the manufacturing sector in India and the service sector in Italy, which are dominant in the MSME factors. Now, this brings us to adopting advanced technologies like there is Industry 4.0 or even artificial intelligence, as Gabriele just talked about, which can revolutionize the SMA operations by streamlining processes or enabling data-driven decisions and even automating a lot of tasks that require a lot of manforce, which is not needed. So this collaboration calls for is that we share the best practices and leverage the innovations that the G7 countries and India has done so far, which involves creating dynamic online platforms. Like the Indian government has created a government e-marketplace, which allows all the recognized SMEs to register in one place and to deal with and to trade with all the G7 countries and the other countries of the world. This is a practice that can be very effectively adopted by the G7 countries as well. And how this can be improved and worked on effectively is through joint research projects and through application development processes in which we can pool the best resources all the countries involved have. Lastly, I would just like to say that under the Italian presidency of the G7, we have a unique opportunity to champion these initiatives and also ensure that the SMEs in India and Italy are at the forefront of the digital transformation, driving sustainable growth, as Caitlin mentioned, and in our economy. Thank you.
The idea of creating the government e-marketplaces that deal with SMEs in India as well as global companies is a very good idea and something that we should probably collaborate on in the future, both the organizations should. Now, my next question is a little different from the economic, social, and governance position, and it is to Ms. Electra. We know that the G7 presidency in Italy has explicitly mentioned that it will retain focus on conflict resolution both in the Russia-Ukraine conflict and in the Middle East. We know that the conflicts no longer affect a particular area itself, but they impact the whole world and the globe, knowing that the globalization phenomenon is in place. With the rise in global conflicts since 2022, how can the negative implications on international trade and exports add to the concerns related to food security and conflict-prone regions? And how is latter a priority of the G7 and how can it be dealt with?
Okay, so basically there is a vicious feedback loop between conflict and anger, currently at play in dozens of countries worldwide. Indeed, war drives anger, but is also true that anger drives war. And 2022 marked the starting point of an unprecedented global anger, and predictably global instability rose in tandem. Indeed, FAO stated that 80% of people in the world in a situation of food insecurity are living in a conflict-prone zone. So it's true on one hand that the influence that wars have on food security is more evident because warring parties may plunder an enemy's food supply, deliberately destroying farming, livestock, and other civilian infrastructure. But it is also true the reverse, because food insecurity can precipitate violent political conflict. Of course, is one one of among several causal factors, but a sudden change in the availability of price of basic foodstuff and energy can trigger an explosion of social unrest. So the international community and especially the collaboration between the G7 and India is called to address hunger emergency before they metastasize into larger scale security threats, as well as condemning the use of food as a weapon of war and bring new resources to bear on the problem of food-related instability. Going deep, agriculture productivity in India is confronting with inequity and ecological strains. Nevertheless, in the grand narrative of global food security, India's role in both as a leader and a learner is ready to synthesize its lesson from within to foster a more food secure world. The first area I was thinking about is India as a leader, and the two areas are that in India nowadays is taking place a natural farming revolution that is basically is a chemical free farming system that is rooted in Indian traditions that are enriched with a modern understanding of ecology, resources, recycling, and on-farm resource optimization. So the G7 countries are called to learn from India this new farming system. Another important area in which I think India could be a leader for the G7 countries is the proposal of new nutrition alternatives, like, for example, millet, because millet is a cereal that is nutritional superior to wheat and rice, and because it is more rich in protein, vitamins, and mineral, but it also could be very important in the new ecological transition because it's highly adaptive to a wide range of ecological conditions and thrive well in rain-fed. So basically it requires a minimal quantity of water, fertilizer, and pesticide. But on the other hand, I think that the G7 can help India in its role of as a leader in the global security, food security globally, by helping the country in making the value chain of fertilizers smooth at global level, because India is becoming one of the most important producer of fertilizers, but also in the area of employment, because almost 50% of the Indian population is employed in agriculture. So basically a structured and ethical fair system of connection between the G7 and India could be important for the widespread use of Indian agricultural talent and in the wide project of a democratization of technology in order to ensure digital technology to every farmer in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aletra. Totally agree with the points that the year of millets has had its effect now that countries are recognizing that with the current conditions of the environment and the climatic problems, issues in agriculture, millets can be a great source of agriculture and food production of nutritional foods, and India can be a leading party in this. Now, this was the conversation about food production in conflict-prone areas. The next and the last, but not the least question is to Mr. Sanjay Gururajan. We know that climate, energy, nexus, and food security have occupied major focus in the area of G7 this time, especially under the Italian presidency, and it is mentioned at their website as well. Renewable energy is an unrefuted source of energy that we know will be the dominant source of energy in the future. And given the global shifts in energy dynamics, how can then India and Italy, as the presidency of the G7, cooperate to enhance energy security and include diversification of energy resources, joint investments in renewable energy, and innovation in energy technologies?
I think it's a important topic that we are mentioning when we talk about renewable energy, because if you look in the world, fossil fuel has been significantly dominating the industry for the past 6 to 7 decades, ever since the end of World War II. So, with respect to India and how the G7 countries and currently under the president of Italy can emphasize and increase renewable energies, I would initially start off with the saying that since India has initiated or started the International Solar Alliance, and Italy is a close member alongside other key G7 partners such as France and Germany, it would be important that these countries can cooperate with India to enhance energy security. They could do this bilaterally or multilaterally, that they could focus on research and development. And as my partner Weber had said rightfully, that through research and development, they can develop on solar energy components that could contribute not only to the domestic side of energy demand, but also for global supply of energy. Furthermore, to focus on, I think you are talking much more on the financial aspect of it. In the financial aspect, I think India in the past 9 years has invested about 250 billion euros in the domestic sector in renewable energy, which has almost helped about 2 to 3 million people to get energy sources which do not rely on fossil fuels and utilize cleaner sources of energy. I think for a country like India to focus upon this, this is a crucial aspect. And even within the Italians in particular, they have also enhanced their investment sectors. They have invested about 50 to 60 billion euros in the past decade in the energy sectors, and they have also looked at decoupling from the carbon-based economy. Furthermore, through the International Solar Alliance, I think India is looking at investing about 980 billion euros in other all partners. Therefore, I think it would be quite important that this India-Italian partnership would enhance not only for their bilateral relations, but also for the multilateral thing. As you mentioned on the innovation pattern, I think India and Italy can utilize the dialogue that was conducted in Porto, in the India-EU dialogue in 2021, where they were focusing on diversification of energy sources into offshore wind units, into tapping potential green hydrogen. This could be particularly important as hydrogen can serve as the future pathway to the world. And then ultimately, we are not only supposed to tap and utilize these hydrogen or green energy sources, we are also supposed to find out solutions where we can conserve these energies and we can provide it for the future generation. I hope that this has answered your question. Thank you.
Yes, Sanjay, perfectly answered my question. So we have covered a wide range of topics ranging from maritime security to cybersecurity threats, agricultural production, year of millets, AI, startups, economy, and the list just goes on and on. And to have a further discussion, we now move on to the Q&A, that is the question and answer round. Just to explain a little bit, I request the panelists from both the sides to paste their questions in the chat box first. And they also have to mention the person to whom the question is directed at. And once I select the questions, the respective panelists can either unmute themselves and ask the question themselves, or if it's comfortable, they can allow me to speak the question on their part. And then the respective person can answer as well. So I can see that we already have questions in the chat box from Geostrata. We're waiting for the panelists from Mondo Internazionale. So let's start with Soumya's question, which is directed at Mr. Gabriele. Soumya, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Sure. So Gabriele, you talked about cybersecurity, and my question is basically how can India and Italy enhance the cybersecurity collaboration, specifically in the Indo Pacific region, so that we can ensure a more free, open maritime domain? And what role can Italy as G7 president play in supporting this strategy? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, to build an effective maritime domain, I think that this goes a bit beyond cybersecurity and stuff connected with the data and critical infrastructure. I think that, as Mr. Pavan said at the beginning of this panel, the cornerstone of an effective maritime domain strategy would be focusing on ports, logistic hubs, and other maritime infrastructures. In recent years, I saw a twist in the priorities between the commercial routes and the maritime infrastructure, because up to 15 years ago, the commercial routes adapted to the position and the displacement of ports and other maritime infrastructure. Nowadays, it's the opposite, that the twist I'm talking about, because the ports are adapting and the displacement of the maritime infrastructure is adapting to the commercial routes. And so several logistic hubs, several commercial ports, commercial harbor have been built in strategic places. The case of the Ochamchira port in Georgia is, I think, emblematic about this. But even more, I think that to establish an effective maritime domain in the Indo Pacific region between Italy and India would it be to focus on the establishment of commercial routes, so economic corridors mainly, which either promotes economic development, but even more political development and interaction between the states, between nations, and between people, because the economic corridors are a foundation, a necessary foundation, I'd say, for the development of an effective private-public partnership, which I think we could all agree that is an excellent landing point for cooperation between the two states, and can be an excellent foundation as well for the reassurance of the security and of the cooperation in several other issues to tackle, as well as cybersecurity, to come back to your question. So yes, I think that it would be mainly these two specific points. So establish shared maritime routes and focusing on the cornerstone of the issue, so the lack of maritime and logistic infrastructure. Thank you. I hope to have answered your question.
That answers your question, right? All right. So now moving on to Caitlin's question for Gargi. Caitlin, would you like to unmute yourself, or would you like me to speak?
Yeah, I can go ahead. Yeah, because I also spoke a little bit about the topic of green entrepreneurship, but more in relationship to agricultural smallholders, especially in India. So I would like to know, since you spoke about green entrepreneurship, but at a, on the whole, I would just like to know, what do you think are the current structural challenges to encouraging green entrepreneurship in general in India? And then on the basis of this information, I think from there, we could start to talk more about how green entrepreneurship, both in India and in the G7 countries, could be like concretely encouraged through policies.
Thank you for that question, Caitlin. So firstly, we need to understand that there are multiple things in India that needs to be really a structural changes. For example, there is a financial support. So what happens is green entrepreneurs are often struggling to secure adequate financing due to the high upfront costs and risks. So maybe G7 collaboration, and particularly the collaboration with the Italian entrepreneurs, the financial support could be diverted towards more Indian entrepreneurs that are working on the sustainability and green incentives. Secondly, also there are many structural changes that could come with inconsistent regulations. So regulatory landscapes in India can be challenging for green entrepreneurs in particularly, because it is more complex in nature. So we need to look after that as well. Apart from that, there are many things like market readiness, then green infrastructure. So in these areas, maybe G7 countries can collaborate with India for better green infrastructure building in India, and then maybe we can move further towards the sustainable society. Thank you. I think I have answered your question. right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks.
Also, Gargi, you had a question for Caitlin as well. So why don't you go ahead and ask?
Yeah, sure. So my question was how India can Italy and collaborate more effectively within the multilateral frameworks, keeping the Italy's presidency of G7 in mind and other international organizations to address global challenges, particularly the climate change, and how we can collaborate more on sustainable development.
Yeah, I think Italy especially is a big player on, let's say, the international cooperation and international development stage. And I think I'm a big believer in South-South cooperation, as long as South-South cooperation is carried out in a responsible manner and there's no continuation of this dynamic of big economic or cultural differences between two countries that are working in cooperation for sustainable development in another country. So I think India is probably one of the best potential leaders for South-South cooperation because it's a great example, I think, of obviously a country that's had a huge economic boom, but then at the same time is not in a position to be to give this unfair or disadvantaged power dynamic in relationship to other countries in the field of South-South cooperation. And I think this, in any given multilateral situation, whether it be the G7, whether it be the United Nations, the FAO, I think any sort of multilateral organization is a great arena to start implementing South-South cooperation. So I think Italy, especially, that's very interested. Italy's big interest right now is Africa. I think, especially in terms of international cooperation and development. But I think Italy could also start to engage with other countries, like especially in the global South and especially India, to start thinking about more of how to engage with other actors in order to work on, economic development, sustainable development, and stabilization of other countries in tandem with countries such as India that are in a fantastic position to work with countries that are more, let's say, that are more similar in terms of economic development. So I think India is a great potential conduit and great potential leader for the future in a multilateral situation for that sort of South-South cooperation.
Right. Thank you so much, Caitlin. The next question, Weber, you had a question for Elettra. Please go ahead and ask her.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I had this question for Elettra. We could see even before the Russia-Ukraine war, we have had Ukraine as a very big supplier of wheat to the whole world, right? And you mentioned something about how hunger drives war and how war drives hunger. We have seen both of those scenarios in the past 1 year, especially with respect to Russia-Ukraine war and then the whole situation in Israel, right? I had to ask this question that how can the two blocks, which is India and G7 together, or maybe Italy in particular, help to combat something like this, to like have supply chains so that we don't have this issue again. I think India to a level, even this time, we were reliable on ourselves because we do produce a lot of wheat ourselves, but a lot of countries did not have that privilege. So how can we prevent something like this happening in the future? If you could please answer that.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. And I think that India had played an important role after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in the case of wheat, but I was stressing the topic of millet because since it is a cereal that is more nutritional valued in respect with rice and wheat, I think G7 and especially Italy could open the market of these new cereals in the G7 countries, but also in the most affected countries after in terms of global in food security after the Ukrainian invasion. And I think in this respect, the G7 could be also an important mediator between India and Africa, especially after the recent agreement between India and Africa in respect of global food security. The second, I think, important area is also the employment area, because in the G7 countries, the employment rate in the agriculture sector is decreasing, while in India, almost 50% of the population is working in agriculture. So this creating a smooth and ethically structured system of migration between the two countries could be important for the G7 in order to acquire the new knowledge, as for example the natural farming revolution that is happening in India, but at the same time, Indian talents can acquire knowledge about, technology and enhance their knowledge, because in India there is a very big difference between regions, among regions. So it's important that India can how to say, can have like the same level of technology a country level. So like creating an ethical and fair system of migration could be another important measure.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that answers my questions perfectly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elettra. Thank you, Vaibhav. We have a question from Michele directed at Sanjay. Michele, would you like to unmute yourself and ask him yourself?
Yes, of course. Thank you. The question is about the energy that you described before, about given the global shifts in energy dynamics, and how can India and Italy cooperate to enhance energy security, including diversification of energy sources, joint investment in renewable energy, and innovation in energy technology? Because I think it's the most important thing is about the security of country is energy.
Thank you, Mr. Pawan, for asking that insightful question. So I think the way that I would put the answer is, firstly, I would like to touch upon the investments perspective in renewable energy. Since India in particular has immense solar and wind energy potential, and in Italy has particular expertise in renewable technologies, both countries could host panel events, could have in-person visits, focusing on how these particular technologies can be developed and to obtain crucial investments that would help enriching and advancing these tech that would further necessitate and help both countries facilitating the move towards renewable energy. Then secondly, I would like to talk about the technology transfer and capacity building. Through Italy sharing their technologies with India in such as solar panels, wind turbines, and energy storage system. These transfers could be done through technological agreements, through joint R&D programs and capacity building initiatives that could help facilitate the better collaboration between India and Italy. Furthermore, to enhance diversification of energy sources, India and Italy can explore opportunities for diversifying their energy sources by investing in emerging technologies, and also that in particular could focus on green hydrogen, biofuels, and offshore wind energy. This could particularly be done through joint projects or knowledge sharing that could then facilitate advantage for both the countries. Finally, in terms of energy technologies, India and Italy can furthermore focus on advanced energy storage system and carbon capture and storage solutions. This then would not only entail developing newer energies, furthermore, it could help capturing these newer energy sources, and it could be helpful at a time where the energy sources are being unable to develop due to some technological difficulties. Thank you. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Sanjay, you had a question for Michele as well. Can you ask him that too?
So my question to Mr. Michele was, what are the opportunities and challenges in expanding defense and security cooperation between India and Italy, particularly in the context of counterterrorism and joint military exercises? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a really interesting questions about the counterterrorism, because I think that Italy had a lot of experiences about the counterterrorism in Italy, and not only in Italy, but all over the world. So about the counterterrorism, I think that the opportunities are two. The first one is information sharing and intelligence cooperation, just to exchange information about the terrorism, and the other operations, and provide valuable insights and strategy for India by Italy. And the other time, I think that's about joint training programs between counterterrorism forces, focusing on our areas like urban warfare, sustainable rescue, and counter-insurgency operations. So I think there are many opportunities about the counterterrorism. But the other 2 points, I think that's most important about the joint military exercise for maritime security, or in general to implement defense technology collaboration between the two countries, or the other countries, like the other countries for European Union or United States, not only against terrorism, but the other, maybe, hope not, but maybe in one time the other contests like war. So I think that's we can implement and share information about the cyber defense, unmanned systems, advanced weapon, defense technology in general. And the other time, it's important to share the information and to share the collaboration between the two countries, with Leonardo Fincantieri, the other company from Italy, and the other company from India, of course, about industrial partnership and defense procurement. I think that there are the opportunities between the two countries, but there are many challenges about the geopolitical considerations between different countries. I think that's India and Italy have the perspectives about the world and appertain in the alliance and the collaboration between different countries. So we have a lot of challenges in Africa, of course, with Russia and China in Africa. But at the same time, I think that we have many challenges in the Indo Pacific context, and of course in Asia and Europe, of course, with Ukraine and the other problem with Russia. So we have to share information about the geopolitical consideration and the perspectives. So decide where we are alliance to maintain and to preserve the relation with these countries, and to implement the solution against the other countries, or just to inform and to adopt the right decision to maintain the relation between different countries. So I think that's about the geopolitical consideration. I think we have to calculate, to discuss about the participation from Persian Gulf, for example. So from Qatar, United Arab Emirates, or the other countries, Saudi Arabia, and of course we have to discuss about the other part in South Asia, so Vietnam and the other countries like that. So India is in the middle between Afghanistan or the other country like Myanmar, or China with Taiwan. So I think that's the most important location for interest in Asia, in the Pacific region. At the same time, is in the middle between relation between China and Africa. So I think that's the good point for Italy and the other countries for G7 to discuss the rule and the location, and to maintain the relation in this context, to have a right vision of the future.
Thank you, Mr. Pawan, for that insightful information. I think that answers my question pretty well.
Thank you so much, everyone. With this, I think we have no more questions for the Q&A round. Can you please confirm with a nod?
I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Singh.
Mr. Vaibhav, right? Okay, go ahead, please.
Mr. Singh, I really enjoyed your explanation on the cooperation between tech companies and startups. So I'd like to know your opinion on the possible cooperation between universities and research institute as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Gabriele. As I mentioned last week, I was having this conversation with the Italian consul general you guys have in Bangalore, right, Mr. Alfonso Tagliafieri, where we were talking about the same things when it comes to the academic collaboration between the two countries. He told me that a lot of we have had the number of Indian students going to Italy are increasing year on year, right? And more than just that, we have had a lot of collaboration. For example, he said a lot of interesting things about how a lot of green technology research is happening between Italian universities and IISc that we have here in Bangalore, and a lot of other Indian universities. He told me a lot of things are mainly focused on green technology, per se, a lot of things about green hydrogen. So yeah, that is something which both the countries can work on. And again, as you asked, I think there is still a lot of scope when it comes to joint ventures of this nature. A lot of research and development can happen, whether it comes to Industry 4.0 or whether it comes to AI, ML. I think both the countries have enough capabilities to collaborate on this level. So yeah, I think there is a lot of we are going on a right path when it comes to India and Italy relations on academic collaboration, but there is much, much, much more that we can tap into.
Yes, I definitely agree. Thank you for your answer.
Right, so I guess that was the last question from both the sides. And with this, we sort of come to the conclusion of this event. We've talked about a plethora of things, and I think all of us agree that information sharing, especially in terms of countering threats of terrorism and piracy, occupy the major part of this discussion. Knowledge sharing, investment in tech capital, capacity building in digital transformation, having e-markets like Soumya had mentioned, like Caitlin had mentioned, to support small stakeholders in agricultural fields, like Weber mentioned about information and technology, like AI cooperation and maintaining the human centricity of it, like Sanjay mentioned about global supply chains, and Gargi also mentioned about the same. And India finally becoming a leader of South-South cooperation with the G7 as its support, and basically having this having this supply chain, a strong supply chain between both the developed and the developing countries and between continents, with regards to be it security, be it agricultural supplies, be it industry, be it technology, be it entrepreneurship. So these are the things that this very insightful panel discussed today. And with this, the Youth Roundtable Conference on Sustainability, Technology, and Geostrategy in India and G7 relations between the Geostrata and Mondo Internazionale comes to an end, and it concludes on a positive note that is bound to define the future cooperation and dialogue between the two countries as well as between the two continents, and the potential of India being enthusiastically involved with the G7 and the world development. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining, for Webhub's insightful remarks, for Soumya's, for Michele, Gabriele, Caitlin, and Eletra, Gargi, and Sanjay as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining and making this discussion so fruitful today. And that is when we end this roundtable conference. Thank you.
Thank you, too.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you, everyone.